Commemorating the fifth anniversary of the 44-day war, state of affairs in the Ukraine war and the simmering Israel-Iran conflict, President Serge Sargsyan's marathon interview, President Kocharyan's interview, and Narek Karapetyan and Robert Amsterdam on Tucker Carlson. Is that enough for you? These and other topics we are going to take up on today's Armenian News Network Week in Review for November 9, 2025, with Arthur Martirosyan, an expert in international negotiations. Hello, Arthur. Always good to have you back on the Groong podcast.
Hi, it's always good to be with you guys.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Okay, so November 9, that's yesterday, marked the end of the 44-day war in 2020, and so it's been 5 years now. Yet Armenian politics entirely revolve around a seminal event in our modern history. From the Pashinyan regime's daily lies back then, like Hakhteluyank, to the 5,000 Armenian defensemen killed, to the more than 10,000 Armenians who were injured, and the more than 10,000 families left injured and exposed to lifelong risk of destitution, to today's compromised national security, this war continues to affect the lives of Armenians around the world. So I wanted to give you a moment to sound off about this and tell me your impressions. Arthur?
Well, yes, it's surprisingly fast. 5 years ago on this day, we had kind of the end of the war, but that end is kind of still looming in terms of security risks for Armenia and Armenians, as you mentioned. I think the most challenging issue is after every war, the parties that do not learn lessons, do not have a transparent process for learning lessons, are doomed to repeat the same mistakes or not gaining much from the process. You know, it's interesting that Prime Minister Pashinyan has been challenging the previous presidents to debate with him the issue, and they certainly declined any debating with him. But de facto, that debate is going on because even if it's not a face-to-face debate, but then we can see how different parties, namely the third president, the second president, and to a degree, the first president, Levon Petrosyan, are taking barbs against his stance, against his interpretation of what happened and why it happened the way it happened. Unfortunately, the commission that they have in the National Assembly is to come up with the lessons learned kind of investigation, and the public is not going to see results of that investigation. And there is no pressure on Pashinyan to reveal all the lessons, so it allows him to continue to blame the previous governments, blame everybody to escape his own responsibility for what happened. So that's the unfortunate part about this anniversary. I think wars happen, losses are possible, but what's not permissible is avoiding lessons learned. That's something that every nation that has recovered, has shown resilience, has done historically. And if we don't do that, unfortunately, I cannot say that we're going to be able to avoid the same mistakes going forward.
Ovik, what are your thoughts?
Well, Arthur Martirosyan gave a very logical and balanced response, so I'm going to give the emotional one. I think that, you mentioned, you forgot to, maybe you omitted the complete ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, which may be considered the result of this war as well. 150,000 Armenians no longer have a home. We're going to talk about this, but I was watching President Kocharyan's interview, and, I concur with him in that Pashinyan did everything, we've covered this. Pashinyan did everything to not preventing a war, but to almost instigate this war, whether it is the withdrawing from negotiations with the OSCE Minsk group, to aggressive rhetoric with Turkey and Azerbaijan, to the July 2020 I don't know what you would call it, conflagration on the border where he gave like more than 70 battles crosses to people, something like, you probably wouldn't be even given it throughout the whole Artsakh war, the first Artsakh war. Unfortunately, this is a nightmare for Armenians. We try hard not to show it, but I think inside this war has affected every single Armenian. I don't see, regardless of what Pashinyan does in Armenia, I don't see how Armenians worldwide will be able to accept what has happened, what is happening. And unfortunately, despite all the talk about peace, without any security guarantees, without any actually proof that there will be peace, as Arthur mentioned, we are poised to go into this and go into this possibly from a less advantageous position. And, that's what you get when the loser in the side remains and retains power. And unfortunately, that's what happened in Armenia, and this nightmare continues without an end, it seems.
Yeah. For me also, I think key takeaways 5 years later are the lack of a report by the War Commission or a real War Commission, to be honest, which was not assigned. So we don't know exactly what happened, how it happened, and such. And
An independent commission, that is.
absolutely, an independent one. I mean, you can't have the civil contract investigating itself and finding itself guilty or not guilty. It's just not natural. The
I think
other
no matter how they try to avoid that, they're not publishing it because no matter what they say, the responsibility still is going to be gravely on them. So that's why they're not publishing it, to continue
Absolutely.
to play the blame game.
Absolutely. It's the blame game and it's politicized. And one of the comments that keeps coming up is Pashinyan saying that he should have recognized Artsakh as a part of Azerbaijan way back then, back when he came to power. And I think that's evidence of him having learned a wrong lesson from a war that has not been investigated. Had he said to the Armenian people that I'm coming to power to give Artsakh away, he would not have come to power because he came to power saying Artsakh is Armenia. He came to power to eradicate corruption in previous governments, et cetera, et cetera. None of those things are done. He did not keep Artsakh. He didn't recognize Artsakh. He has not gotten rid of corruption. His government is arguably one of the most corrupt times that we are living through right now in Armenia. So, what part of democracy this is unclear, and I think about it as a consequence of a war that has not been investigated with an independent commission with consequences. I'm going to move on because we have so many topics that we want to talk about. Arthur, let's take a look at the international scene around Armenia. Last week, we asked our guests to discuss what they thought the present situation is for two conflicts which are critical to our region, the war in Ukraine and then the simmering Iran-Israel conflict. What's your assessment of where the Ukraine war is at present, and what is its most likely trajectory given the US-Russia relations and where the EU is as well?
Well, there are obviously, I don't have a crystal ball when it comes to wars, but there are several scenarios, and we can talk about the most probable one. And at this point, the most probable one is that Russia will continue the gradual encroachment, territorial. It's slow. Some people, like President Trump, was saying that this war should have ended in a week or maybe a month or so. But I don't think it's a kind of a conflict where the sides were ready for the configuration that it has taken. The beginning of the war, I don't think anyone could predict how the Western coalition, especially the Europeans, would be supporting Ukraine. I think that they've gone beyond all expectations when it comes to monetary support, military intelligence support, supporting the war, and that war has dragged, not just because of that, but because anyone who was familiar with the pre-war situation from well, it was a war, but it was a kind of a low intensity war from 2014 to 22. So anyone who was familiar with that must have known that Ukrainians were prepared, and the types of engineering and reinforcement that they had along the line of contact would be impossible to overcome for any military of the world, and even the U.S. We've seen how the U.S. Fought in Iraq, how the U.S. Struggled in Afghanistan. So it's not Iraq or Afghanistan. It's, I think, much more formidable when it comes to its ability to put up military resistance. And maybe Russians too somewhat miscalculated their ability to quickly break the backbone of that army. That was their major miscalculation. However, I think one of the biggest disadvantages Ukraine right now has is this war of attrition. Although they are able to hit the targets way in the Russian depth to the Ural Mountains, not beyond it, but every day you get news how the Ukrainian drones have hit Russian refineries, various targets in the depth of the Russian way in the rear. But that doesn't mean that the Russia does not inflict huge damage on Ukraine. And that damage shows because places like Kiev, the capital, has only 7 hours of electricity right now. Other places are even in much worse situation, except the western parts of the country. But the biggest disadvantage is the manpower, trained manpower, motivated manpower. After 4 years of fighting, you lose the most capable units. Replacements are not easy. It requires fast learning, and you can't really do that when you are in the war situation. So, how things might develop in that scenario, where the Ukrainian side may decide that it's time to stop and go back to the negotiation table and accept the Russian terms, it's very hard to say. I think Zelensky is ready to fight for as long as possible, but you can do that only if you have the manpower. It's not the weapons, it's not the lack of intelligence, it's the manpower that is the weakest side. And Russians are fully aware of that. So they're going to continue to put pressure. Their recent advancements on the battlefield show that gradually they are getting to at least their program minimum, which is getting in control of entire Donbass and some areas outside of it, in Kharkiv, in Sumy, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. How far they can go then? Will they reach the Dnieper River? Although some fighting is already in Dnipropetrovsk, the old name of that region. It's very hard to say how fast they can move after they quote unquote liberate Donbass. But I think the most intensive fighting or preparation for fighting was done along that line. What's going to happen after that, it's very hard to say. And so much of the outcome will depend on where they stop. Obviously, Russian agenda is not just getting in control of parts of Ukraine. Their agenda is beyond that. It's about the architecture, security architecture with Europeans and Americans. And the recent decision by Trump to renew the nuclear testing shows that we still are in the frame of possible escalation here and there. But I'm positive that sooner or later the losses on the battlefield will allow the parties to come to the table and find a solution. And as to the United States, who's the major player in this, obviously, in some ways, when you analyze what happens right now, is very close to what was predicted by some analysts when the war started. Some very, I think, sound analysis was provided by a couple of Harvard professors, In short, they were saying that everybody will be losing. And I think at this point we can say that to a degree, if there is a winner, it's the United States.
Hmm.
But the United States too has things to lose in this confrontation. That's why Trump wants to stop it. He speaks about peace, but the real interest is to stop it until Russians have gotten to areas that are already kind of by agreement with Ukraine are going to be under U.S. Corporate control. So this is the cynical part of this war, right? We see major losses. Not only cities are destroyed, infrastructure is demolished. Human losses are humongous in terms of military losses on both sides and civilian too. And suffering is immense. And yet, behind it are real interests, or sometimes I call it mythologized security interests. Europeans want to keep Ukraine as a buffer zone, as a country that will be, whatever is left of it, is going to continue to play a proxy against Russia. The U.S. wants to, the U.S., meaning Trump administration, wants to put an end to it so that they gain quickly dividends from deals with Zelensky regime. And unfortunately, I don't see a very quick end to this. The war is likely to drag at least for another 6 months to a year, at least. Uh, and it will depend on the progress on the ground, as I said.
Okay. Arthur, before I ask you about the Iran-Israel conflict, let me take a moment for an aside, because as Putin has been rejecting some of these ceasefires coming from the United States, he has justified it by saying that unless there's a comprehensive peace deal, a
Mhm.
temporary ceasefire is meaningless and will only prolong the conflict. He
Right.
specifically mentioned the case of Armenia and Azerbaijan not achieving peace in
Mm,
1994
right.
and settling for a tenuous ceasefire for 25 years. What lessons did Putin learn from the Artsakh conflict?
It's obvious he learned the lesson that if you keep it frozen, at some point when balance changes or when some other players would like to ignite it, it's possible that there will be a repeat of the conflict at the point where you are least prepared to have it. So he wants to do what Armenians didn't do in 94 and what Aliyev is trying to do right now. So kind of put a permanent end to the conflict. I don't believe there are permanent ends to conflicts like this because no matter how you end, there's going to be a sense of injustice done. And our future generations are going to look back and live with that injustice. Peace is only possible when there is a just solution. Injustice breeds new wars. When they're going to happen, how they're going to happen, it's very hard to say. But Putin brushes that part off. He thinks that much as Aliyev is trying to find a permanent solution to the conflict, he can do that in Ukraine. And they have their own experience, and that experience is Chechnya, right? So you either get a peace on your terms, and then you deal with other issues. You bring your own narrative of kind of it was probably unjust, but that injustice was a result of the external powers kind of meddling in the process, trying to get their own interests satisfied at the expense of the poor Chechens, then it will be poor Ukrainians. So it was done at their expense because they had a regime that was playing with the outside players against Russia. The general Russian perception of what they would want as an outcome is a very simple formula, which is no unfriendly power in our backyard. Can they achieve that? Can they find a new modus vivendi with Europeans? I doubt it's going to be possible short term, but much will depend on where Europe is going to be when that war ends, and will the European Union itself be able to act as a unitary actor on those matters?
So between these comments and the comments that Putin has made in the past about Armenia itself not recognizing Artsakh, should we understand that he thinks that one of our presidents should have recognized Artsakh in the past?
I think so, yes. Well, I mean, it wouldn't put an end to the conflict, but it could be a very powerful way to transform the conflict in some ways, because, not recognizing it when the negotiations were still continuing is reasonable,
Mhm.
but not recognizing it when the other side chooses war, which was
Right at September 27, basically, right?
right, right. Because essentially that was a violation of one of the principles behind the negotiation process.
Mhm.
No military solution to the problem, not even threat of military use, right? So once one of the sides violates that, then you cannot hope that you're going to be able to find a negotiated settlement with them. So if there's no negotiated settlement, then there is a question why you are not recognizing it. All right. Before, the argument was if we recognize it, we are moving out of the negotiation process. But if there is no negotiation process, if there is a war, then Armenia should have been ready. Unilateral recognition would not would not make much sense. But that means that Armenian diplomacy in the previous years should have worked on securing commitments from other players that in case Azerbaijan violates the major principle, the OSCE principle, and the principle that the parties were negotiating on, then they should join in and recognize Artsakh. That either hasn't been done, or if some work was done, we know what happened. The Pashinyan government was talking about in the war about some kind of corrective measure that somehow the international community, much as in the case of Kosovo, would step in and do it. But nobody is going to do it if you are not making the first step.
Right. I mean, Macron threatened to recognize Artsakh under certain conditions during the 44-day war, but he didn't go ahead because I think one of their reasonings was that even Armenia has not gone forward with that.
Well, I mean, it was used against Armenia as an argument by
Yeah.
many. I mean, even
Yeah.
if they really didn't want to recognize, they had a pretext, right? I mean, and I think Russians also were saying that how can we recognize if Armenia itself is not recognizing?
Yeah.
So they were always putting the ball in the Armenian court, and that's one of the lessons from this war. Why the Pashinyan government decided not to recognize when it should have.
Arthur, so changing the topic slightly, but coming closer to Armenia. 10 days ago, we had a discussion with Professor Trita Parsi from the Quincy Institute, and he believes that a second phase of the June war on Iran by Israel and the US is inevitable. Can you give your own assessment of where this conflict is headed and how it may affect Armenia, especially given now that the US is somehow engaged in this trip thing that was signed on August 8th. It's right on the border of Iran for our listeners who don't know. So, what is your assessment of the potential war on Iran and the impact to Armenia?
Well, again, we need to look into scenarios. Saying that it's inevitable, one can agree or disagree with that stark assessment. But the issue is inevitable, but when, right? If it's going to happen, when? And that question begs more of scenario thinking rather than saying it's going to happen next month or next year or whatever. So I'll put three scenarios, although there are more. I mean, I'm not going to deliberate right now into more sophisticated analysis here. The first one is the status quo. The status quo continues for some time, and then we need to look at variables that make the status quo possible and when it may break. The second one is the war, right? It's also possible, and what conditions and what variables would drive parties, especially Israel, to find a military solution. And the third one is instead of a military solution, attempts at creating another implosion in Iran. So if you look at TRIP, it doesn't rule out other scenarios, right? Especially the military one, but it's one of the instruments that would allow to continue to put pressure from outside on Iran, trying to cut it off from various routes, although it's going to be very difficult to achieve, even if TRIP materializes. I don't know when people are talking, giving different time estimates, how quickly that can be operational. It won't mean that Iran won't have the ability to work with Russia through Azerbaijan. But that's also iffy because where is going to be Azerbaijan on the issue of Israel and US again trying to start military operations against Iran. So right now, status quo is holding, and I think it to a degree depends on to a large degree depends on the Israeli domestic politics and Netanyahu as a survivor. Paradoxically, as a survivor, he resembles Pashinyan, or Pashinyan resembles him, right? He has essentially taken under his control judiciary in Israel, which is an unprecedented development towards a more theocratic and autocratic regime in Israel. They also have elections coming in 26 and also, I think, in June. So he, as a survivor, may look at his chances to beat his major opponent right now is Bennett. And how does that relate to the scenario of war? If he sees that he's losing, although all criminal cases against him have been muted, if he sees that he might lose the elections, that may be one way for him to even postpone elections. Right now, at some point, he lost, I mean, in terms of his coalition of right-wing parties, lost traction, and their rating was below, I think, 45% even, which is not enough to have the majority in Knesset. But right now he is back to 52%. So what's going to happen domestically is important. The protests in Israel also have been dulled by two major factors. One, Trump is speaking about not just the end of the war in Gaza, but end of the era of terror in the Middle East. But I think more sound analysis shows that Hamas is still there. He may continue to put pressure on Hamas and in Gaza, but he is also, as I said, the chances of him looking at a war with Iran as a distraction from the domestic agenda is going to be important to watch. So implosion. I don't think they're going to give up the attempts at the implosion, but implosion also means that you need to have a very robust network, intelligence network within Iran, and that has suffered some setbacks. Yes, Mossad played a huge role in during the war, but they also have lost a significant number of agents. So for the foreseeable future, both sides need to replenish their stockpiles of missiles. So for some time, the status quo is going to hold. And as I said, for me, the kind of breaking point might be getting closer to June to watch closely what's going to happen there. But there are also chances that no matter what we say, Netanyahu is going to be able to win the elections in June 26.
Sadly, I didn't hear a fourth scenario that says they'll make peace and coexist.
That I don't think that's in the making. Even if Netanyahu goes, I think the issue of the nuclear weapons and nuclear threat of Iran, or without even nuclear, Iran as the thorn on the side of Israel, as the last remaining kind of stronghold of anti-Israeli
Yeah.
politics in the Middle East, is going to be there for some time. And for any Israeli government, even left of center, that's going to be an issue for years to come.
Okay. Let's come to Armenia now. The third president of Armenia, Serge Sargsyan, held nearly a 7-hour interview on the Imnemnimi podcast in this past week. Obviously, there's no chance of addressing everything he discussed, but let's tackle a few interesting points that I was able to, highlight. Over time, we may be in touch on more because I believe this is going to be in the political discourse all the way until the elections. So, President Sargsyan said that there was a proposal from the OSCE Minsk group that was quite acceptable for Armenia, but Pashinyan essentially walked away from it. Pashinyan, for a long time, had denied that such a proposal existed or that he even received it. He made some excuses like it
Yeah,
was
the
addressed to
wrong
the president
address.
of Armenia. Yeah, wrong
Right.
address. Oops. He didn't sign for it when the FedEx came. Now he admits actually that there was a proposal, but they're having problems scanning it. I don't know how many pages is it, like 3,000, but most of these previous proposals were like 2 pages. Anyway, so he says that after they scan it, they will publish it, but the scanning process takes months apparently. So they'll publish it by the end of the year. What do
Yes,
you
he's a
make?
slow reader.
And a slow scanner, like the technology they're using. I don't know what kind of
Yeah,
technology
they
they're
have a
using.
Xerox machine from the 60s.
So, what do you make of all this flip-flopping, Arthur? What's with all the denials, BS, to be honest? And do you think whatever will be published can be authentic and trustworthy, or perhaps it will be doctored or maybe even presented out of context?
Well, I mean, it's a kind of a belated attempt to manage some of the PR issues by the third president. I mean, this kind of soul searching for 7 hours was, I think, overdue. It could have been done in shorter parts and long before. But it's good that it happened. I must say that I didn't watch the whole thing, but I didn't find anything that was totally new to me or maybe even to anyone in Armenia. I mean, he said things that already have been discussed, and some of the things that he said do not, I don't think anyone can cast any serious doubts about their veracity. We know what was going on, we know what happened, and when you put all these pieces together, I mean, the responsibility of Pashinyan for what happened is inescapable. I mean, you cannot really dismiss those accusations. Obviously, I mean, Pashinyan immediately went into writing in social media his rebuttals to what was said and whatnot, but it's yeah, the grim reality is that he came to power by saying that he's starting negotiations from scratch. He essentially pulled out Armenia from the process, insisting that Karabakh Armenians should be brought back to the table, that that was the critical mistake made by his predecessors, kind of again blaming them. But he was not able to do that, obviously. It was impossible to do that. Starting negotiations from scratch is problematic. Kind of rejecting the proposal that was already on the table was a huge mistake. Next was overplaying Armenia's alternative. So if you are pulling out of the negotiation process, then the war becomes not only inevitable, but you bring it, make it closer, right? I mean, because the other side now has a kind of not legitimate, but some ways understandable stance, right?
The
If
cost
they
is
don't
ability,
want
yeah.
to, if they are rejecting your proposals, the only means to fix things I have is self-help. Self-help is a war. So he overplayed Armenia's ability to fight that war. Later, he said that although he is the commander-in-chief of the country, he is not a military man, so he didn't realize the balance of power was very different. And his diplomacy really failed in unbelievable ways, including the dismissal of the opportunity of Turkey joining Azerbaijan in that, kind of not seeing what was already happening in terms of preparation to the war, an advanced preparation stage when they were in protracted military exercises after July developments. So everything that Serge Sargsyan had to say makes a lot of sense. Except one, and that gives Pashinyan a little bit of room to play, right? So if the proposal was on the table, why didn't you guys accept it? And he himself has gone on record saying that I couldn't accept it because you'd call me traitor had I accepted it. So meaning that you were not ready to accept it, and you were not ready for the war, and you drove the country to this defeat when you also alienated from the major ally you had. Well, I mean, not entirely alienated, but you were making moves that were not making Russians very enthusiastic about playing with you, especially given that they had their own interests with Azerbaijan and Turkey.
Arthur, can I also interrupt for one moment? I mean, for me, I look at it at what happened during the war. He basically decided that it was more important for him to protect his reputation as a non-traitor in exchange for 2,500 to 5,000 Armenian lives.
Exactly,
That's just
yes. And
unacceptable. Unacceptable.
both Serge Sargsyan and Kocharyan said that Putin was proposing to stop the war. I don't know if Aliyev was ready, as one of them claimed. I think Kocharyan said that even Aliyev was ready to agree with Putin to put an end somewhere mid-October, right?
Hmm.
But Pashinyan said that he was going to continue to fight, although his chief of staff was saying that resources were limited and the war needed to be stopped right away.
That's right. That was the army leadership also. The army general chief of staff
Right,
was
right.
telling him we can't continue
So
this war.
if all these accusations hold, and they do, I think, then the only thing that Pashinyan can do is say all of it was wrong. The entire Karabakh movement was wrong. It was all instigated by Moscow, and he even went as far as to say that had I agreed to the terms of peace in the midst of that war, it could mean that Armenia would lose its sovereignty, implying that the price tag Putin had put for him for the ceasefire was further integration of Armenia into the Russian sphere, on par with Belarus or whatever. Whether that's true or not, I cannot say. I mean, I haven't seen any interest on the Russian side to do that with Armenia. The real Russian interest has always been, as I said, no unfriendly power in our backyard. Belarus and Ukraine are different because they have this fixation on the Slavic Union.
Right.
But or the some of the more extreme are wherever the Slavs or Russian speakers live, that should be more integrated with Russia. But when it comes to Armenia, Armenia has been seen as
Liability,
the only, well, I mean, in some ways even as a burden, but it's kind of the only value it has is the military base that they have there. And
Mhm.
even with that military base in the last decade or so, and especially with Pashinyan and his anti-CSTO moves and whatnot, they've been looking at it as well. Again, I mean that base primarily was against Turkey, and Turkey played its cards really well in Moscow, persuading Russians that they were even going to be a wedge in the NATO. So if that's the case, if they can play with Russians on their agenda, then why the military base even loses its value? That was
Yeah.
certainly an erroneous way of assessing things because Turks never gave up or never even could drive that kind of a wedge in NATO. As we could see, there were very high hopes that they could block Sweden and Finland becoming part of NATO, but that never happened. So wrong assessments, wrong calculations, over reliance on short-term interests in Moscow. We can go on and on with this, but that does not excuse the Armenian government and Pashinyan for doing what they did. Moreover, I think Russians wanted to keep the perimeters of that war as much secluded as possible. So if Armenia had joined Artsakh through mobilization and real war effort, their fear was that Azerbaijan could start hitting Armenian territory, and that immediately would invoke CSTO article about the support of Armenia and aggression, and they didn't want that. So that's why Pashinyan was getting very strong messages from Moscow at the time that you should not commit your troops to crossing into Karabakh. So all of that happened because the diplomatic war at the negotiation table, he had lost it. He had lost it, and therefore, right now, his new narrative is all that was wrong. Armenia should have been what Armenia was. Karabakh was a burden. Karabakh
A
was a
leash. Yeah,
problem.
he used the word leash, I believe, on Armenia's neck.
Yes, and that's an interpretation certainly that does not go well with I hope with majority of Armenians. Although I can see that there is also a segment of the population that is really not just buying into the arguments that Pashinyan is making, but because they're getting some things that they always wanted to see. Okay, we don't want a war and our kids are not going to go and be in the harm's way. Let's accept what it is, right? That map that he shows, let's accept that. That maybe we can live in peace with Azerbaijan and Turkey. So I'm saying that because, as I can see, his narrative has some traction. I mean, not with the majority of the population, obviously, but some traction with segments. And he's hoping that that should be enough for him to stay in power and survive, much as Netanyahu is hoping to survive in June 26. So does Pashinyan, with his new narrative about the real Armenia, that this is the border and we're going to be at peace with the neighbors. But that narrative does not have legs to stand on because, as we could see, Azerbaijan is not even making any secrets about their agenda. And that agenda makes most Armenians really concerned about what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Because next, war is just one way to conquer a country. There are other means to do that. There are economic levers that can be used. There are an isolated country that is Armenia, putting all the levers, giving all the levers to Turkey and Azerbaijan only may mean that it may turn into a vassal state of these two powers, or one power, if one were to look at from their perspective on the issues.
Arthur, from 2015 to 2019, Piotr Switalski was ambassador of the EU to Armenia, and he was a huge sponsor of the so-called civil society in Armenia and a big backer of Pashinyan and friends, consequently. He even wrote a book about the 2018 events called The Armenian Revolution, an Unfinished Cable. So it comes as no
Well, he
surprise
was
that
not the only writer of books about that.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Everyone and their uncle. So it comes as no surprise that Switalski was very active during the coup of 2018. He met with Pashinyan and other leaders.
Right.
Serge Sargsyan has so far been very reserved about disclosing more details, although I can imagine the Armenian government at the time would have a lot of details on what was going on. But suffice it to say that one day I think we will learn much more. During the interview, however, President Sargsyan did disclose some new details, to me at least. Most famously, despite the EU leadership sending their congratulations to President Sargsyan and then afterwards Prime Minister Sargsyan, because he got elected as Prime Minister in the Armenian parliament, it appears that Svitalski refused to transmit that letter to the Armenian government for 10 days. Now, here's the new details. During the protests, according to, again, President Sargsyan, Svitalski met with various people and spread news that Pashinyan had been offered the deputy prime minister position if he would only calm down the protests. Sargsyan in the interview said he had never made such an offer, and it's not clear who, if there was such an offer, and who would have made it. I'm not sure what Serge Sargsyan was insinuating here, but why don't you talk about the role of the EU in Armenia in general in 2018 and leading up to it, and specifically if you know anything more about this incident by Svitalski?
Well, I mean, there is a saying, the devil is in details, but in this case, we know the devil, so the details do not change much in terms of what was going on at the time. It's obvious that Pashinyan was playing with Europeans. When he came to power, even before, when he was in the opposition, he was positioning himself as an anti-Eurasian Union, CSTO, and a pro-European politician. When he came to power, he tried to balance by saying that we're going to have the best relations with Russia Armenia has ever had, and blah, blah, blah. But for Europeans, it was a chance. Not only Europeans, but let's say the West and Americans and all Western powers were interested in, if not immediately excluding Russia from the region, but then diminishing its influence and then gradually maybe squeezing it out by supporting all. They call it civil society, but I disagree with the description of what that was. And in that sense, Serge Sargsyan probably is correct by saying that they were funded by Europeans and Western governments, and therefore they were doing what the Western governments wanted them to do, right? That's obvious. But there is a question why things were not taken under control before, right? So that game was allowed to continue well into 2018. And I think what I heard Serge Sargsyan say was that he was getting ready to enact the same laws on controlling foreign influence in Armenia and whatnot, except that he was waiting for a precedent, and the precedent came when Austria enacted such laws. If it says anything, it says that he was very cautious player in that. I mean, if a leader can see that that influence has detrimental effect on Armenia, I mean, you do that. You do not wait for someone to set a precedent for you. If you are waiting for a precedent, it means that you want to justify with others. And you can say that in the bigger game, right? He wanted to play with Europeans, he wanted to play with the West, and therefore that was one way for him to keep that track open, right? Yes, understandable, but you need to make sure that when they cross the red lines, and they had crossed the red lines in terms of open support. And Svitalski's example is one of many, I think, of open and unprecedented interference or even intervention in Armenian domestic agenda, trying to reshape it, trying to fairly aggressively redirect the foreign policy of the country. In some ways, Svitalski was just the instrument of that policy. What he was doing was not just one person acting, right? I mean, we kind of, the devil again is not just Svitalski. The devil in this case was whoever was playing that deadly game for Armenia. And I must say that the most difficult part for me, when you look at the European Union as an actor in this region, I mean, they had no problems having excellent, I would even say, relations with dictator Aliyev, a corrupt regime of Aliyev, clearly autocratic, They didn't have any problems. They put Armenia on the same level with that regime, not only with the accession to the Council of Europe and all other stuff, but every time they were trying to take Armenia down, no matter how much Armenia progressed, gradually, slowly. It's a given. It was not a full-blown democracy and whatnot, but it was very different from utterly corrupt and autocratic regime, sultanistic regime of Aliyev. But they were trying always to keep us on the same level, on the same level.
100%. I couldn't agree more with you.
Okay, so I just want to close this topic by, did you make note of anything else in the Sargsyan interview that you would actually like to question, you would pose a question to Sargsyan himself, like perhaps shortcomings or things that are still a gap in your, understanding of the events?
Well, I think by and large, again, in broad brush, the picture is clear. There are some details that it will take time until we find out most, if not all. But in broad brush, the picture is clear. And I think the new Pashinyan narrative is really not very different from what behind closed doors some of the European and American diplomats would be telling Armenian presidents before Pashinyan. Change your relations with Turkey, come to some kind of rapprochement with Turkey, settle Karabakh, and that will diminish the Russian influence on you. I mean, I'm saying what was said, some of it even publicly, and then you will have legitimate aspirations to become part of the Western world. So that's exactly what Pashinyan is, with some adjustments, right? But the theme is the same. The theme is the same. That we now have an opportunity. The future is now, Pashinyan is saying. So the future that we dreamt about is now. And what is that future that he and civil society, the so-called civil society, dreamt about? Is exactly that. And no Karabakh, forget about it. We're closing that page. We are trying to build normal relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan by doing whatever they demand. And therefore, we should be more acceptable for the West. The problem he has with that narrative is that the West still doesn't need you.
Yeah.
They need you in as much as you are preferably taking openly anti-Russian stance. But even Georgia doesn't do it anymore. The government of Georgia, that is. I mean, they still have certainly opposition and groups that would not accept that. But by and large, their government is playing a very cautious game here. Doesn't want to become a proxy challenging Russia on these issues. So, would they be satisfied if they just at this stage diminish the Russian influence in Armenia or get more anti-Russian sentiments in Armenia? Yes, of course. So they have achieved their goal. And where are you going to go after this?
Yeah.
It's obvious that you're going to continue to be doing what you've been doing. You cannot really, I mean, now make about face and 180 degrees and say, I'm disappointed in the West too. Although Pashinyan is capable of doing all sorts of moves, right? If that satisfied his political agenda and interests. And I think he's also, in some ways, is losing his touch with reality because he's been increasingly seeing himself as the kind of founding father of new Armenia. Kind of, I'm the one who's
That's why he
building this
wants a
new
fourth
nation.
republic.
The new identity, well, the Fourth Republic, the new identity, new real Armenia, this is what it's going to be. And he's the founder, and even the new church, right? He's the kind of founding father of this new thing, a historical figure. And I think he's overplaying on at least several of these kind of instruments. He's overplaying and a false note constantly. There are false notes, as in his fight with the church, as in his agenda of peace. Kind of every time he gets a setback when Aliyev speaks, and then they have to explain what does it mean when Aliyev says that. It means that Aliyev hasn't changed his mind. It means that the agenda has not changed at all. But they were trying hard to persuade us that it's going to be all over. It's going to be all okay. What's next? If he agrees to, I mean, if he stays in power after 26, he's certainly going to go and do what Turkey and Azerbaijan are going to be demanding, because, as I said, I mean, he's now going to be even more dependent on them. You don't want a war, therefore do this. And the
Yeah.
list is big. And one of the things that they will certainly do, and Aliyev again went public, and no matter how Alain Simonian says that it's only for the domestic consumption, these things are not for domestic consumption. They have
Yeah.
been part of the agenda since 90s, and that hasn't changed.
Okay. Now moving on to the second president of Armenia's interview. Robert Kocharyan gave an hour-long interview to Channel 5. I personally watched it, but I'm not sure if there's a lot of new material. But Kocharyan discussed some points which are corroborated by Foreign Minister of Azerbaijan, Ceyhun Bayramov. That there were clear opportunities during the war when Pashinyan could have accepted the ceasefire and stopped the losses. I think that October 17, 19 timeframe was, according to Kocharyan, and that time. Kocharyan said, in fact, I mean, Serge Sargsyan and all the former leadership of Armenia almost were in Artsakh during the war, and the government of Artsakh basically left them waiting. He wouldn't even meet with them.
Yeah,
Narek
he
Karapetyan,
said, yeah, he will
he will
eat me.
eat.
He said it,
Yeah, he
or
will eat me
something like that.
alive. He said, like, he basically, when Kocharyan offered to ask to meet with Narek Karapetyan, Karapetyan said, Pashinyan will eat me alive if I do, indicating the strong influence that Pashinyan had in Artsakh. Of course, we can't talk much about Narek Karapetyan and others because they're in jail in Baku right now. But in general, I get the impression of a spineless Armenian and Artsakh leadership more interested in covering their behind than doing the right thing for their people and their servicemen. Your thoughts, any key takeaways from Robert Kocharyan's interview?
Again, I mean, he mostly reiterated the points that he had made in the past. Maybe some small detail here and there that he added when it comes to that peace opportunity, or when they offered the three former presidents to make a trip to Moscow, how it was not. But we knew all of that. I mean, it was happening in real time. It was covered. They were offering their services, and their services were essentially rejected by Pashinyan's regime. Now, he stopped short of saying that the remote control for Pashinyan was probably elsewhere, uh, because you need evidence to go that far, right? But you cannot also rule that out. That's the whole point. Um, and I think, as I said in my opening remarks, this is one way. I mean, Pashinyan wanted a debate. It is happening. That's also a way of debating him, right? When you're making points that are counter to the propaganda, 724 on public television, owned by the ruling party. If that message gets out, it leaves, for some people, some space to consider other interpretations of what happened. I think the problem that we also have is that this is happening in as part of the campaign. It's not full swing campaign, electoral campaign yet, but it's also part of the election, and it's going to be one of the topics in that agenda. electoral agenda. The problem that both Serge Sargsyan and Kocharyan have is that as the former leaders of Armenia, and that has to do with the political culture in this country. Once there are labels, they are permanent. I mean, once they stick a label, it stays for a long time. It's gonna take a lot of hard work, and they miss that. As I said, I mean, it's belated PR. They miss the opportunity to come clean with their own record of what they had done. Yes, Kocharyan also said that his terms as president were the most peaceful time in Armenia. Of course, Pashinyan can say, "Oh, there were all sorts of things happening in skirmishes in Artsakh and border and whatnot," and this can go on and on. But will the two presidents who are trying to stay politically active, if not immediately and directly, especially Serge Sargsyan, but then their parties. Will they be able to garner more votes by stepping up the plate and giving more details about what happened? I don't think so because, again, what they're saying is known, and it's not helping them recover from that, stigma that has been placed on them. That's the unfortunate part. That's part the of immature, I think, political culture of Armenia. But that's the reality that they will have to face going into this campaign. So I think that the interviews are welcome in terms of informing the public and providing the public counter arguments to the state propaganda, but not sufficient to help them overcome the stigma.
Arthur Kocharyan said that he hoped in 2026 that the Armenian people will make, actually said, must make the right choice and get rid of these evil people. The question to me was, does the opposition have the chops to remove these authorities?
I think, again, when I'm asked about future, that's part of my professional background. I always think in scenarios. And there are three scenarios, and all three have different likelihoods. One is they do manage to mobilize the population. The turnout in the elections is going to be so high, and the negative ranking that the ruling party has is going to break their back. So they're not going to be able to even make it to the parliament. The scenario, possible scenario, possible, probable, very low probability at this point. And I can say why I think it's low right now. May change, it may, but we will need to see. We need to follow the variables that would allow that scenario to materialize or not to materialize.
Mhm.
The second scenario is that Pashinyan manages to replicate elections of 21. He again gets the majority, his party gets the majority, or the coalition gets a majority in the parliament, and we go into the next phase of turning Armenia into a Turkey-Azerbaijan vassal state, now totally dependent on them. And then the other scenario, which I think is most likely right now, is that he manages to get to the parliament, but not enough to get the majority and to become the prime minister again, right? Not enough even with the coalition parties, the minion parties that pocket opposition, the so-called opposition that he has created. That scenario is both possible and probable. Not kind of probability slightly lower than the first one, right? Which right now seems to be still a possibility. Keeping him out of the parliament, I don't think so, because he still has a significant administrative resource. He controls it. He has all the buttons, and he can enact policies that will be very welcomed by certain segments of the population. It can be related to the military service. It can be related to visa liberalization with Europe. It can be a promise of the AI paradise in Armenia and peace in Armenia and whatnot. So he will be playing all of those, but I don't think those will help him. He will still have to rely very heavily on the administrative resource and the networks, because in Armenia it's not just people who are in the government and people who depend on the government when it comes to their uh, paychecks. It's the network around these people. So it's much larger than just administrative resource. He will rely on that primarily, and then I do not even rule out that at this time, because it's a life or death politically for him, and maybe even not politically, and he may go even for much cruder violations of that. I mean, if we just look at the local elections in Armenia, I mean, people who have beaten their party in elections have been removed from power. Unfortunately, one was killed even.
Yeah, that's
Right?
right. That's right.
Arrested, killed, removed from power. I mean,
Hmm.
that has been the reality. And it is happening. And we do not have Switalski anymore. I mean,
Well,
but
we have
we have
extremely
new
quiet
Switalskis.
Western
Right. We
diplomats.
have new Switalskis who condone all of that, right?
Yeah.
Look at what he's doing with the church, and look at the sheer and very obvious violations of the Constitution that he can get away with, and there is nothing that is being said
Arthur,
from
you
Europe.
spoke of networks. There are a couple of networks with some level of momentum in them. For example, Tatoyan and his Wings of Unity, and Karapetyan and his Merdzevov. What's your assessment of these movements, briefly?
Yeah, well, I think the 60% of the undecided sort of voters who have this desire to see a third force, political force, is significant in Armenia. And these parties, if they become, well, I mean, Tatoyan's is a political party. He already announced that he's going to participate. And if the movement Frank Sinatra movement. I'll have it my way. The that that movement has yet to make the claim for political with political agenda. Although it's obvious that they are going in that direction. It's not clear to me what Pashinyan is going to be doing. He also understands that there are probably more serious claimants for the 60%. I mean, if they're gonna get most votes from that 60%, that's a very dangerous scenario for them. So he will be doing everything to block that from happening. And again, I mean, there are no red lines that he's not gonna be crossing. He's not doing anything active right now, but that doesn't mean that he will not when time is right for him to act. If he really sees that, for instance, Tatoyan is getting some gravity and traction. Some of the public opinion surveys I've seen are not yet giving him much of a chance to get the majority of votes. Yes, he is going to be struggling, most likely has chances to get into the parliament, but not beyond that. So I think one of the problems we have with the opposition field, instead of uniting with one agenda, which is we're going into these elections with one goal. Pashinyan has to be out. That's the goal. They are coming up with their own programs. These programs are very similar, maybe slight differences, but most right of the center with some kind of promises that are really from the leftist agenda, kind of social justice and whatnot. But primarily they are right of the center. Their only kind of competing advantage is the personal charisma and the personality, right? Do we trust this guy or do we not trust that guy? That is not very healthy because, look, if I'm coming up with a program and I'm promising you that there will be major changes in healthcare, in foreign policy, in this and that. Okay, it's a beautiful program, but it turns out that you got into parliament with a 7% or 10% even vote, and you are not the one to implement that program. So what's going to happen to voters who cast their vote for you? And Pashinyan is still prime minister.
Right.
It's going to
Right.
bring more apathy. It's going to
But you
bring
know,
more apathy.
Arthur, I think you're absolutely right that there is a 60% plus disaffected contingent of the Armenian voter base. This is an opportunity for if the opposition could ever come together under a unified banner, like you said, and drive towards a goal. There's a huge opportunity in attracting all these voters who basically say, "I'm not going to vote," or "I don't plan to vote," or "I don't want to say what I'm going to do." Um,
Now, I think what would make a lot of sense to me if they said that they are going into this election with one purpose of defeating Pashinyan and taking that force out of the parliament, that would make a lot of sense. But that would mean that they're not coming promising to become a new prime minister who would take the moon for us, right? I mean, and turn this country into a paradise or whatever they're promising. Here is I think, a real challenge with that promise. So what they should promise then, we get to the parliament, we get the Pashinyan out, and we then go to another election, and that election will decide the fate of who's going to have the majority, who's going to be the prime minister. Otherwise, in some ways, they're going to play the same game that Pashinyan is going to be happy with.
yeah.
Because you're coming with a program, you already are participating with him, kind of discussing programmatic issues. Voters are going to be lost, or he's promising the same thing. He's in power. Why should we trust this guy? It's all kind of going to be further fragmenting that 60%. And that's what Pashinyan would like to see. Instead, they should say, you 60% vote for anybody but Pashinyan and his minion parties. Let us get the majority in the parliament and we will vote him out. And after that, we will set a new agenda for the new government in Armenia by new fair and free elections.
Arthur,
Period.
we need to wind down because of time, but there is one thing I latched onto. I loved your name for the new party, the Frank Sinatra Party. Maybe they should call themselves with that catchy name, and the Mertsevo people can go
No,
forward.
they should play that song.
Yeah.
I'll
Uh,
do it my way.
let me ask one quick question on the fact that Narek Karapetyan was on Tucker Carlson and close after
Mhm.
that. Without going into the details, this was also like an hour and a half between him and Robert Amsterdam on the show. What was what were your main takeaways from this thing? Who was it for? You know, why did they do this, and with what outcomes in mind?
Well, I think it's obvious if you look at Tucker Carlson and his audience, right, in the United States, and you'll probably know more about the configuration of that audience. But the major theme was the Christian kind of conservative take and trying to uh, start building bridges with that uh, constituency in the United States, right? I mean, kind of, we are the Christian nation. There are these problems, the war, and everything, kind of framing it in the religious context, more or less. Especially with what I heard Narek Karapetyan say, which makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, I think that we should not be playing just with one political force in the United States, no matter how powerful that force seems to be or is. You need to be playing with all for the country, for the nation. It's interesting that the most important issues for me. Yes, Tucker Carlson was saying, "Oh, our taxpayer money was going to support this and that." I don't like it. He was saying, "Yes, very good. There is a more important issue for maybe liberal Americans, maybe not just liberal Americans, any Republican Americans. There is no republic in Armenia." And that's the message. That's the message. Support Republic in Armenia. Put pressure on Pashinyan, who has usurped all branches of power. There are no checks and balances. There is no independent judiciary. And as I said, just as Netanyahu has done in Israel, and even worse than that, there is no rule of law in Armenia. There is rule by law in Armenia. Law is Pashinyan. He wants someone to be arrested, it will be happening.
It's a
And
pattern of force.
that's not what a republic is. And the United States should be interested in having Armenia a republic. And then we'll talk about democracy and all other things. But you cannot have democracy if you do not have a republic. And we do not have one right now.
Okay, well, that happy note, let's close on that one. Thank you, Arthur, for joining us and sharing your insight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was our Weekend Review show. We've been talking with Mr. Arthur G Martirosyan, who is senior consultant with CM Partners. And in 1994, after graduating from Yale University, he joined Conflict Management Group and Harvard Negotiations Project. He has since worked in conflicts in the former Soviet Union, the Middle East, the Balkans, Africa, and Latin America.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. We are jumping through hoops to get these regular podcast episodes to you. I am currently extremely jet lagged and in Europe, but I decided to do this anyways. And one way you can show your thanks is first, make sure you're subscribed, and second, like, share, and comment. But also, if you want to feel extra special in our hearts, then go to podcasts.groong.org/donate, and whatever you can contribute, it will go to improving our reach and producing more content that you like. So thank you for your support. I'm Hovik Manucharyan, somewhere in the Europe.
Well, at this point, we're going to start relying on airport Wi-Fi, Hovik. I'm Asbet
Yes.
Bedrosyan. I'm still in Los Angeles.
And I'm on my way to Armenia. Yeah, can't wait to be back. But yeah, right now I'm in sort of a purgatory. Anyway,
Talk to you next week.
take care, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.